This episode is sponsored by The Power of You, a leadership resource for entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, and anyone intent on developing their leadership impact and supercharging their career. For more information, check the podcast webpage or show notes. Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. Folks, this is a very special episode for me. This doesn't happen much, and it's going to be a fun interview, just given how well I know the subject of my interview today. Pushkar Anand has been one of my students, one of my clients. I'm going to say students for a number of years. I did a program with Bob Proctor. I did a number of programs with Bob, but one program in particular that I did with him was called Fourth Dimensional Leadership. And we basically broadcast that worldwide, had thousands of people watching it. And Pushkar happened to stumble onto something there. And next thing I know, I'm getting a phone call from this guy I've never met before. And I've got a very limited amount of bandwidth for personal coaching. And he was pretty insistent that I take him on as a client. And I said, look, there's a bit of a queue here, but I'm not sure what you're going to be doing and why you want to work with me or anything else. And there was just something about the way he positioned himself and how he actually, what's the word I would use here? How he actually communicated, not from an intellectual perspective, although that is certainly a large part of who he is, but from his soul. There was a connection there that was impossible for me to ignore. So I said, yeah, I'll do some work with you. And the fee, I'm going to just actually have you donate the fee to the Unstoppable Foundation as part of my tithe. And he said, fine. And that's what we did. And for a number of years, we carried that arrangement forward. Fast forward a bit here, and I got to know him quite well. So this is just a little bit of a background historically. Pushkar came out of the banking industry over 20 years, essentially led a $10 billion banking business by the time he was 35. And he was touched by something. He was awakened by something in him sparked. And it began a seeking process for him where he actually ended up moving away from banking, because when we first started working, his entire focus point was senior executive in a bank, in a global bank, literally directing hundreds of thousands of people, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. Over the course of our work together, and this has nothing to do with me, it has everything to do with him and how he actually pursued what was important to him. He started moving away from a focal point on banking and started looking at, what does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to be awake? And how do I communicate that with people? How do I actually touch people from that perspective? And where he's at right now is on a mission to actually work with and awaken over 1 billion people. So I want to and we're going to talk about how he's intending to do that, and perhaps just a little bit about my part in that as well. So Pushkar, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Love that introduction. As you do know, I address you as Grandmaster B Square, and I shall do that as we have this conversation.
Okay, I will let you do that. Okay.
Thank you.
It is taking me a bit of time to kind of get used to that. That being said, what just kind of was the spark for you? Because when we started working, you were pretty focused on this banking career. It had been 20 plus years of your life. You were quite successful, and you were looking at, okay, what's the next level up? How do I enhance my experience of being successful in this domain? Something shifted. What was it?
Absolutely. And I think the shift was around moving from the intellect to the soul. We talk about the soul of business, but there's a soul of each individual. And the enterprise we build as a business is an extension of that soul. And that's exactly what happened. When I started in this 15-year journey, I started trying to find that foolproof formula of success. Well, I didn't even know what success is. At the end of the journey, where you played an important part, I ended up trying to understand, what is this concept of purpose? And I tied it back to the calling of the soul. So from somebody who was out to ace the intellect and become this really senior global banker, there's a transformation, a metamorphosis into somebody who's truly awake, who's out to become the person he's always meant to be through living his purpose. And everything else that's happened, including the book that's been written, the enterprise that's been set up, the global practice that's there, has all come from that shift, that transformation.
You talk about purpose, and we're going to talk about the book here in just a moment, but the idea of purpose and you said a 15-year journey. So your journey was actually predating our meeting. You were doing a lot of reading. You were doing programmatic work. There was a lot of exploration. And I kind of happened to be on the path, and we got involved. But the idea of purpose, you're talking about the soul speaking, the soul, giving voice to the soul. Equate the two of those, if you would, purpose and soul.
No, absolutely, absolutely. A lot of people use the term purpose, and I don't think the absolute clarity is there. And I think of purpose as the calling of your soul. And I define soul as that fragment of God inside of you. Each of us is born with a soul plan, which is there inside us. But we're given free will. So every time we have that intuition to go out and do something, that's the soul speaking to us. So purpose is the calling of the soul. Soul is a fragment of God, universal spirit. Therefore, when you follow your purpose, or your dharma as it's called, you're actually doing God's work. And if you're doing God's work, how can you ever not have enough money? And that's the beauty of a lot of the work we do together and individually, that if you follow your purpose, you're doing God's work. Your vibration is at such a level, the money comes after you. It literally chases you. You don't need to worry about the money. And that's the kind of vibrational frequency shift we're talking about, not just at an individual level, at a global level. When I talk about 1 billion people, imagine a world where 1 billion people are on that vibrational frequency. The vibration of the planet is going to change. And that's what we're working towards and talking about here.
Yeah. So, in my listening here, and this is for those of you that are listening, I want you to just mark this out. You don't go looking for your purpose. Your purpose already exists. It's an expression. Purpose is an expression of your soul. It is the calling of your soul that is looking to manifest itself in physical form. Yeah, in this time and space reality that we find ourselves occupying. Now, the consequence of that, if you're following, to your point here, if you're following your dharma, if you're following your purpose, well, you don't have to go looking for it. You just have to listen for it, and then begin paying attention and behaving in concert with that music, metaphorically here. You wrote a book that is called, and it's a bestseller, published in I don't know how many languages now. It's called Manifest Your Infinite Riches. Now, I want you to just listen to this, folks, as you're kind of honing in on what we're talking about here. Manifesting your infinite riches. If you're doing God's work, God, meaning I'm going to use God as a label for all kinds of different things, that spirit, that soul, that life force, that energy that, kind of causes things to be. You're going to be a man. You can't not manifest. You're always manifesting anyway. But if you're working through the spirit that moves to and through us, it gives you access to an infinite storehouse of riches, not just money, but an infinite storehouse of riches that take all kinds of different forms. When you set out to write the book, what was it that you imagined it to be, and what did it actually become?
Well, the writing process that spurred me on was that I have a dharma to fulfill here. I have a duty to humanity to get this out, because it took me 15 years to manifest my infinite riches. And the duty or the responsibility I felt I was left with is that all that you've learned, all that you've studied from a theoretical and practical viewpoint, get it out in front of people across the world so they can become the person they always meant to be, manifest their infinite riches in a lot less time than it took me. That has always been the feeling in my heart, and that is what I go with when I talk about the book, I promote the book, I get it in front of people. It's never about how much money am I going to make out of it. No, that's a side effect of the work we do.
Yeah.
The focus is get it out there so people can be truly awake, because as I say, when one of us rises, all of us rise.
Now, from a thematic perspective, the book has a number of different things. What is the core theme that seems to link everything together?
And I start the book with these words. Yes, you are infinitely rich. You are infinitely rich because you are you. And I think these are phenomenal words. not because I wrote them, but because they reinforce a core truth. And that core truth is every human being is infinitely rich. The problem is this thing called living takes us away from this truth. And this book brings us right back there with the 4-pillar foundation.
4 pillars. Okay, let's unbundle these 4 pillars. Okay.
I talk about these 4 often, but I always start with one particular one. In this case, I absolutely must, because it dovetails directly into the work you've devoted your life to. And this podcast here, the first one is you've got to live in spiritual harmony, in harmony with your soul. That's where it all starts. Right? The second one is you've got to recognize your spectacular, incredible potential. The third is you've got to unleash the colossal forces within you. And the last one is, as you do all of these, you've got to literally embrace abundance and prosperity. That's got to be a way of life. That's what you demand from a force bigger than you. See, when all of these 4 things happen, I believe we truly awake. And when we are truly awake, we're on the path to become the person we're always meant to be, to manifest our infinite riches such that we're both materially abundant and spiritually wealthy.
Now, out of those 4, soul alignment comes into play here. As you listen to this, and as you actually kind of begin to, and I'm speaking here to the listeners of the show right now, these 4 pillars, they kind of come under the heading of easy to talk about, hard to do. Okay, so let's just take this one at a time here. So the very first pillar is live in harmony with your soul's calling, right? I mean, that's my word for it, but essentially that. How would you suggest, and I know in the book you actually spend some time with this, but how do you suggest people begin that process? Because it is a process, and it's a living process in my experience.
No, absolutely. It is. And I use a simple model called a trademark model, the 3-step reconnection tool. But in essence, it gets you to answer 3 questions. Right? One is around what is it that you absolutely love to do, which you think you're really good at. The second bit is around your core values. And the third combines the 2 together in a way that there's no reason for you to work. Let's say there's no reason for you to work. You have all the money in the world. Go back to another example, which I don't write in the book, but I read about this donkeys of years ago. Earl Nightingale talked about it 50, 60 years ago. If you're a child locked up at home, it's raining outside, what would you like to do? Whichever of the questions you take or ideally combine them, the answer that you get, that is your dharma. That is your purpose. It's literally as simple as that, but it's not easy. Yeah, because there's so much of conditioning we've had over decades, all of us, that the absence of the easiness here is not a quality we love, despite its simplicity. So we got to unlearn what we have and then identify this and start the transformation journey. It's not an overnight journey.
It's not. In 15 years you've been involved in it. I've been on this journey since the late 1960s. You mentioned Earl Nightingale. Also, another contemporary of Earl's was, my brain just went dead here, Napoleon Hill. And there we go. And most people know Napoleon Hill for Think and Grow Rich, which was and is the largest selling self-help book in history. I mean, millions, and literally tens of millions of books of Think and Grow Rich sold. But he wrote a book back in the 1930s, shortly after he wrote Think and Grow Rich. It was called Outwitting the Devil. And that book was not released. It wasn't published until 2010, I believe, because the family was really hesitant to have it out in the public, out in the wild, because it took to task political institutions, religious institutions, and scholastic institutions, educational systems. And the reason that Hill took it to task was he considered them to be indoctrinational. Outwitting the Devil, in the book, Outwitting the Devil, he's interrogating the devil and what he calls the devil. And in the book, he's actually describing or asking the devil to describe, how do you go about your work? And the devil says, it's easy. I just put people to sleep. That's a euphemism for it. That's a very, very generalized paraphrase of what he's talking about. But how do you put them to sleep? Well, have them stop thinking for themselves. Have them stop listening. Have them start thinking that other people will handle their life for them. Have them believe that they don't have agency. I mean, all of these things that are basically functions of these institutions that he took to task. And he said, you can go back epigenetically. I mean, your grandfather's grandfather, and these lessons get inculcated into the DNA, and people are born with these assessments, these assumptions that they don't have the power to live their dharma. Manifesting your infinite riches, you give a roadmap here about how to wake up from that hypnotic rhythm that society's casting over us all of the time. You've also developed something that's called the Institute for Infinite Riches, if I've got the name correct here. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because the book is one thing, but access to resources are a big deal. And you're developing a community here. So you're not going to do a billion people by yourself with a single book. You've got to have a community of folks that are actually engaged in facilitating an awakening. Can you talk a little bit about the Institute?
Yeah, absolutely. It is an institute. We call it the Center for Infinite Riches. And I think of it as a social enterprise, which is an educational digital platform, which is out to provide this material to as many people as possible across the world. Right? Whether it's a billion, more than a billion, no problem at all. We want to be in 100 plus countries. I think the voice is in 50 plus as of now in the first 6 months, which isn't bad.
Not bad at all.
A part of the vision is to have at least 100 like-minded people who are spreading this message day in and day out across every continent in these 100 plus countries. As of now, there's obviously good old me. There's you, who's our chief mentor. We have Natalie Ledwell from Mind Movies, who's an advisor, and a handful of other people, and the conversations with 8 or 9 more who are keen to get involved. So we want this to grow significantly, not from the perspective of an ego, or a unicorn or anything like that, but from the perspective of uplifting humanity, awakening humanity at a huge scale in a way that this community, this movement is not dependent on one person. When things get overly dependent on one person, the ego gets in the way, right? And somebody very dear to both of us is Wayne Dyer used to talk about ego as edging God out. And we don't want that to happen. We don't want it to become an egoistic, intellect-driven story of one person. We want it to be a movement that goes beyond individual people, across countries, across continents, and is perpetually awakening humanity and uplifting the vibrational frequency of the planet.
Yeah, you mentioned Natalie Ledwell. Natalie's a dear, dear friend. I've known her for years. Mind Movies. And if you're curious, check that out, mindmovies.com. But you've also got some other folks involved with this that are pretty well known, have got some notoriety in their own right. Jack Canfield, another good friend of mine, is involved with this as well. As a matter of fact, I think you sat with an interview with Jack that has been broadcast since then. What was Jack's take on this movement and on the book itself?
Well, it was Jack's been very kind. He's written on our front cover, "This is the book we've all been waiting for." So when Jack puts that there, it makes me, as the author, even taking away my bias, think there must be something very special in there. And Jack is a huge fan of the work that we're doing, and he understands the vision. And we had a really good conversation, which is it's on YouTube, my website, his channel, literally going back all of these years, and how I started my quest, how you came into my life. He talked about how long both of you have known each other. And it was, I think, amongst the last 2 or 3 interviews he did before he hung up his boots on 30th of June, 2025. But he's absolutely a fan of the work. And what he really appreciated out of it, I think, was the fact that we're not talking about it from an ego-driven perspective. What is in it for me? Can we make this into a unicorn? What he absolutely related to and what resonated with him was how we're out there on a mission to do the kind of work which he'd done 50 years of his life, and he still continues to at a slower pace. And I think that is the synchronicity we want with like-minded people across the world.
Yeah, like-minded people across the world. Folks, if you're listening, I mean, you are listening, obviously, if you're hearing our words here, but I want you to go to the Center for Infinite Riches. You can get a copy of the book there. What's the URL for that?
And I'll
It's
put it in the
absolutely. It's pushkaranandsworld.com. That's PUSHKAR ANANDS world.com. Or you could even do Center for Infinite Riches, Center spelled CENTRE, or Google it, it'll pop up all over Amazon, brick and mortar stores. It's there everywhere.
Okay, and you can get the book there. There's all kinds of other materials that you can have access to. We've got videos up there. There's a couple of videos of me.
Absolutely. One of my favorite videos is that you did, Grandmaster B Square, and I think you've articulated that so well, the difference between inspiration and motivation. And when you say that inspiration comes from within, that ties in with the soul of business, living your purpose. Motivation is external validation, often ego-driven. You know, we were talking earlier about we're not talking unicorn. We're saying how many people can be uplifted. One is soul-driven, one is ego-driven, and I think you bring that out so well in that particular video.
Well, thank you for saying that. Now, you know, the center is an educational platform. It's a resource. And speaking of education, I mean, speaking of education, folks, listen to Pushkar is educated at Cambridge, London School of Economics. He's got degrees from both of these incredible institutions, and he is not a stranger to learning. And the work that we're talking about with this is a lifelong journey in order to actually silence the ego so that God can speak. And I don't mean God in a religious sense. I'm talking here about God from the spirit perspective, that life force where each of us are unbelievably unique. I mean, the likelihood of another entity existing in the same form as you and I and Pushkar are is so remote that it's not even possible, for all intents and purposes. So we have a unique we have a unique view on reality. As a matter of fact, we have a unique responsibility in creating the experience that we call reality collectively when we wake up. And when we wake up collectively, the power of God, that spirit coming through, has the potential to completely transform the experience of what reality actually can be described as. It doesn't have to be struggle. It can be anything that we actually envision it to be, and it is an envisioning process. And the idea of love comes into play here. I don't know anybody on this planet that when asked and answered sincerely, when asked the question, what would you love to have? They would not say, I want to be oppressed. I want to be not listened to. I want to be not heard. I want to be subjugated to things that are out of my control. Nobody says that. Everybody wants to live a full, free, expressive life where there is an experience of abundance. Nobody says, I want to experience scarcity in my life. We're born into an infinitely rich universe. You can't outgive the universe. You can't you can't take too much from the universe. It's impossible. That all, I'll get off my soapbox here. In the work that you and I did together, now, this is self-serving, and I'm going to just acknowledge that right up front here. What difference did that make for you? Because you had been on a journey for some time, and there was something about what you observed and experienced in the work that I was doing that said, I want to work with this guy. And I'm genuinely curious here, because I've really never asked you this question. What different, what happened? Why me? What happened?
I think that's the magnificence. When you put yourself in that kind of vibration, or you see world from a soul-centric lens. See, we put a whole, for our audiences, there's a whole appendix in the book at the end called Blaine Bartlett, Grandmaster B Square, where I talk through the process of how we got to know each other. But to answer that question briefly, intellectually, I don't know. I'll never know, because it wasn't intellect-driven. It was soul-driven. Yeah. You see, when you were there, Bob being in full flow and he finishes and fades away, and then you come with your twinkly blue eyes, and you said, what you did in the future is determining, I'll say it slowly for everyone's benefit, what you did in the future is determining what you will do in the past. So, as I said, intellectually, I don't know, but feeling-wise, I just knew that we have to work together. And I remember you started by saying, my student, and I'd always said to you, I am your student. It was never a client kind of arrangement. It was literally, and there was no program, there was no material. It was just the voice of the soul. We had conversations every month, literally as the show, the old style thousands of years ago in the Greek or Hindu mythology kind of setup as a teacher and student. And that's how we had those conversations. But what it did for me, yes, I was on a journey on my own, doing a lot of things, but it was somebody who's got the experience of years, differentiated through physical age, yes, but who's already walked the path that I wanted to walk. But at that point in time, I didn't know the path I'm going to walk is the path that you or Jack or we talked about, Wayne or Bob walked. It was walking a path of becoming a senior executive banker. But as we say, a force bigger than us, Wayne used to say, you're not doing anything, you're just getting done. We were both getting done as he was getting done in his life. And it just came and developed and became something else. And at the end of it, I metamorphosed in a way that I had never thought I would. And yes, there's a lot I did in it, but there's a very important part you played as well. And as we put those energies together, those vibrations together, it just evolved and developed into something entirely different, which I don't think any of us had thought of because it was never intellect driven. It was from the soul of life, the soul of business, the soul of enterprise, call it what we like. Those infinite riches which come from the soul.
And what I love about that description, and thank you for that. Thank you very sincerely for that. We started with an outcome in mind, but the outcome quickly dissolved. That wasn't what it was. That's not what the conversations ultimately became about. And that's not what the process ultimately was organized around. And folks, as you're listening to this, our spirit speaks. It moves to and through us all the time. And this is true as an individual. It's also true of our businesses. The soul of business is a real thing. And I think Pushkar's just exposition here about, this work that he and I did together and continue to do together, a focus on outcome will trip us up really quickly because our ego gets attached to outcome. And when we're focused on the process of living, the process of expressing who we are through that spiritual component, through that soul component, our businesses transform, we transform, and we connect with people when we connect with the world in a completely unexpected way. Yeah, Michael Singer, talks about this in The Surrender Experiment. And that's a fascinating book in terms of just letting go and letting yourself quiet enough so that you can hear the spirit speaking and follow the breadcrumbs. You follow the breadcrumbs and you will be absolutely amazed at where you end up. Not so much because of the location and the what it is that you're holding at the end of that journey, but in the process of unfolding, what you've experienced about yourself. There's nobody and no thing out there but me. There's nobody and no thing out there except the expression of who I am, and it mirrors back to me what it is that I'm being. And it starts with being. Pushkar, any last words here to kind of bring this to a close?
I just say, my dear Grandmaster B Square, I have loved this conversation. You're a core component of this journey, this quest I was on, and I've so thoroughly enjoyed talking about that journey to you for our audiences. And I really hope it helps a lot of people start the journey to awaken, start their journey to what I call break through the doorway of fear. Because when you break through that and you come out the other side, you're a different person. You've become the person you always meant to be. And I really hope that's what happens after this conversation. And I genuinely hope, again, from the bottom of my heart, that we do lots more such conversations.
Oh, absolutely. We have conversations all the time anyway, so we'll continue them. Folks, you've been listening to my guest, Pushkar Anand. You can find out more about the Center for Infinite Riches by going to the centerofinfiniteriches.org.
.com.
Center, and it's spelled CENTRE, English spelling, the UK spelling. Centerforinfiniteriches.com. Or you can go to Pushkar Anand's with an S, world.com. PushkarAnand's.com, PushkarAnand'sWorld.com. You will find both of these URLs in the show notes, so don't hesitate to Poke around and see what you can find there. You will be surprised, pleasantly surprised at the resources that he has curated. And as always, as we close off here, I want you to just kind of look around your life and find a way in your life to leverage the riches that you have access to. And what I mean by leverage them is find ways to actually put them in motion. Nature abhors accumulation as an endpoint. Nothing in nature is organized around accumulation. Everything in nature is organized around distribution. So you're going to be wanting to find ways to continuously be a center of distribution. Distribute your wealth, distribute your riches, and you'll find that you're going to be getting back a lot more in return. This is Blaine Bartlett. You've been listening to The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. And until next episode, thank you for listening and have a great rest of your day.
Woohoo!
This episode is sponsored by The Power of You, a leadership resource for entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, and anyone intent on developing their leadership impact and supercharging their career. For more information, check the podcast webpage or show notes. Hi, I'd like to ask you to do something for me if you wouldn't mind. If you like this episode, I'd like you to not only subscribe on your favorite site, but I'd also like you to give a rating. Ideally, a 5-star rating would be greatly appreciated. But I think more importantly also would be just some comments. That helps with the algorithm and it helps build the audience with this. And more than anything else, if you could invite somebody else to listen, just share this episode with a friend, with a colleague. And I'd like to see how we can grow the soul of business. I think it makes a difference. Thanks.